Welcome to the Alcohol Addiction Podcast. I'm, of course, your host, Lee Davey, and today my guest is Jamie Smart. How's life, Jamie?
So far, so good.
So far, so good. It's going to get even better, I promise you. There's not many people leave the podcast feeling worse than when they got on, put it that way.
Good.
I want to start out by saying we're using Skype at the moment, right?
Yeah.
And I was trying to use Zoom earlier on. And I've never used Zoom before. So when Dawn, your assistant, sent me a message and said, "Oh, look, why don't we use Zoom?" First thing that comes up for me is, "Oh my God, I don't know how to use Zoom. This is going to freak me out. Jamie's a really important guest. What if it's all wrong and I don't record it?" And then everything about me is screaming to stay with Skype. And it was the same last night when I was cutting potatoes. My wife said to me, "Why don't you use a potato peeler?" I said, "I've been cutting potatoes with my knife all my life. I'm not using a potato peeler." I use a potato peeler, and guess what? It's a million times easier than using my knife. What is it about us human beings that makes it so difficult for us to change, Jamie?
Well, so it's an interesting question. I see a couple of things. And the first is, I don't know that it is difficult to change. Sometimes it can seem difficult, and sometimes, it's the most natural thing in the world. Like, if you stop and think about it, when you were born, you didn't know hardly anything, and yet you learned tons of stuff. You learned all kinds of things and changed and grew. And my guess is that many of the most important changes that you've made, the new thinking or the new understanding that allowed you to do that, it happened in the blink of an eye. So I'm not sure that it always is difficult to change, though it can be, and it can be for me, and it can be for you, I'm surely. It can be. And what I've noticed is a couple of things. One of the things I've noticed is that we learn from what's new. Okay, so it's interesting. This friend of mine sent me a video the other day, and he was using some new app called Clips. And basically, if you're talking into your phone, it'll subtitle the video you're making while you're doing it. So I was like, "Oh, cool!" And right away, I made a video. Within a few minutes, I was posting something on Facebook of some video I'd made with relatively shonky subtitles on it. But the interesting thing is, I've got no insecurity about that. So it was easy. Whereas I know there's other people who will look at that and go, "Oh, I couldn't do that," and da-da-da-da-da. So for me to make that change, to try something new, was very, very easy. Though in some other domain, it might be difficult for me. Well, the thing that would make it difficult would be my own insecurities about it. So one of the things I've noticed, Lee, is we like as human beings, we like what's familiar to some degree. Everyone's got a different tolerance for it, but we like what's familiar. But we learn from what's different. We learn from what's new. Like, we like the familiar, but we learn by stepping into the unknown. We learn by trying something new. And so I think, certainly in my own experience, the places where it's most difficult to change are the places where I'm out of touch with reality, where I'm confused about how the world works. The place, and I bet, everyone's like this. Like, we all have things that are easy for us to do, that we can do without even having to think about it. Even if it's something simple like making a cup of tea or boiling an egg or peeling a potato or whatever. We have some stuff which we understand, or walking down the street. We have some stuff that we understand so well that we can do it without thinking about it, and that's easy and straightforward and that sort of thing. And there's other things where we just don't understand it. I know in the subject matter we're going to talk about today, I remember when I was drinking, I really, I would often say, "That's it. I'm stopping drinking. I'm done with it. It's over and done with. and I really meant it. And then, 2 days later, or 2 weeks later, or 2 hours later, or 2 seconds later, I'd have a drink in my hand.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's now the world looks very different to me today. And while the journey from one to the other, the journey from a life of alcoholism to a life where I haven't had a drink in many, many years, that was a tough road in some ways. But I remember being at a 12-step meeting, and my whole mindset was, this ain't gonna fucking work for me. This is a waste of time. This is some hippie bullshit. This is, and I could see everything why I was different from these people I was in this church hall with, why I could see. And then I vividly remember I had an insight. And what I saw was, maybe even though you don't think that this could work for you, maybe it could work anyway. Maybe, like I was a guy who knew everything, right? Like, you couldn't tell me anything because I fucking knew it, right? And I was kind of like, I was proud of that. I was smart. I was a smart guy, and I had all the angles figured out, and I'd already figured out that AA wasn't going to work for me. But it was sort of like a choice between that or killing myself. So I was like, okay, well, I may as well go while I figure it out. But I was very dismissive of it, as well as being really freaked out and anxious and scared. I was very dismissive of it. It seemed like bullshit to me. And then suddenly I got this glimpse of something, and it was like a light going on. I was like, maybe even though you know everything and you're smarter than the average bear and you know that this is bullshit and it's not going to work, maybe it could work anyway. Like, maybe you've missed something. And from my perspective today, I see that as hope, and I see that as like a kernel of humility, a tiny drop of humility in an ocean of, I'm fucking right about everything and blah blah blah. But that was enough. That kind of opened the door for me to see something new, and to see that, well, now here's the thing, Lee, that's interesting to me today, is that I didn't do that. I didn't make that change. That was a fresh new thought. That was an insight, a realization. And in many ways, I can trace the life I have today back to that insight, which was, almost like, no, it was. That was like, that literally, as we're doing this interview, that was almost exactly 20 years ago.
It's incredible. It's
incredible. It was April 1997 that I had that insight, and I was like, oh, okay. But I didn't do that. That happened to me. That was an insight, a realization. I didn't make that happen. It happened to me. And so I don't know. I think waiting for things to change or struggling for things to change, I think that can be really difficult. But I think that often when change happens, when change comes, it's effortless. And it's not that there hasn't been effort involved, like, taking the necessary actions and that sort of thing. But I think often it's the struggling, the sort of thrashing about that we do while we're trying to find a deeper understanding of life. Like, it looks to me that where we're close to reality, where we have a good understanding of life, change is relatively straightforward and effortless. And where we don't understand it, it's a bastard. It's hard. Where we're out of touch with the truth of who we are, and the truth of how our experience works, and the truth of how our life works. When we're out of touch with that, it's difficult.
I made some notes there. I want to touch upon and expand upon. The first one was you said about its familiarity. So we're kind of like attracted to this familiarity because it feels comfortable. And just for people listening into this, that familiarity can also be a fucking living nightmare. Like your familiarity might be my life's a mess. It's not just like, oh, I'm familiar in this nice, cozy little fluffy place. Familiarity can be a nightmare. So you could be like, your life could be going down a toilet because of alcohol, but you're familiar with that. You understand it. You know how to kind of live in that chaos. And it could be the peace and quiet that scares the shit out of you, and that you're worried about. Not the, so I just wanted to touch upon that. The other thing I wanted to touch upon was it's like experimentation, isn't it? It's like I'm not quite sure I'm really been ready myself to experiment as much as I could have done in my life. Some sort of fear has held me back from trying it, generally fear of judgment of others. And as I've got older and I've realized that shit is just kind of a story that I'm kind of making up in my head, I've managed to be a lot better at experimenting and being comfortable with being uncomfortable, if that's what you mean. Interesting you said about the hippie bullshit. It's like, I really don't think this is going to work. Is that often an indicator in your experience that we need to wake up a minute and pay attention to what we're feeling really uncomfortable about?
I don't know. I mean, that would just be my opinion. There's a lot of stuff to me today that looks like hippie bullshit. So, and I use that as kind of a shorthand just for stuff that looks more way out than I am currently happy with. But the interesting thing in my own experience is I've seen lots of things which looked like, more way out than I was happy with, that I'm now like, oh no, that's real. And I've seen other stuff that looked real to me that now just looks like complete nonsense. So, I don't know. I don't know if it's an indicator of anything other than what we're familiar with and what we know and what we're comfortable or uncomfortable with.
When you were in that meeting and you're thinking to yourself, this isn't going to work for me, I know this isn't going to work for me, and you're using that type of language. I get people I work with all the time using the same kind of language, and I'm just creating an online training course at the moment to help people break free from alcohol. And one of the first things that I'm focusing on is having an open mind, because I find it, if I feel in my experience that I need to help the person uncover the resistance and help them break it before we even begin. Otherwise, I'm just going to be yes-butted all the way through our coaching and stuff. Having worked with you and read all your books and joined your Facebook group, I'm interested in your view on what is an open mind.
Yeah, I don't know. I assume that if someone's sitting in front of me, their mind is open enough. Like if something's got them to that point, I don't need, because the challenge, and you'll recognize this, Lee, if I say to someone, now I need you to be open-minded, then that right there is for a lot of people, that the more they try to be open-minded, the more they're going to be thinking about it. So what I instead endeavor to do is just to create a space, to create an atmosphere, if you like, where people just feel at ease and not having to overthink it. Like it's interesting. A question you may have heard me ask is, when do you get your best ideas? And what I've noticed is that almost inevitably people get their best ideas when their mind is at rest, when they're not thinking too hard, when they're feeling safe and comfortable and at ease. Now, that's not always the case. Sometimes people get great ideas when the shit hits the fan. But I find from a coaching and a training and transformational perspective, a safe, warm, in terms of emotionally warm, relaxed, enjoyable environment is a great, that's a great way to create a space where someone's going to have an open mind. I don't want to give them anything to fight against, because to me an open mind is really just a mind that's at ease. You know, it looks to me, Lee, like it's natural for the human mind to come up with good ideas, to come up with realizations and insights, to come up with solutions to things, to come up with new perspectives. That's really, really natural for people. I don't need, when I'm working with a client, okay, I don't need them to do anything to come up with, I don't say, okay, come up with some good ideas or come up with some good insights or whatever. I just create the context for that that makes it more likely and easy for that to happen. Because I know that if I have a client who's feeling relaxed and at ease and connected to me and unconcerned and knows that things are going to be okay, right? Like if I've got them at their ease, and here's actually my starting point, is I let them know in whatever way I can. I'll be saying to them, you have reason to be hopeful. You have every reason to be hopeful. I know it may have been tough until now, but you can relax, because everything you have every reason to be hopeful that you can get past this, that you can get over this, that you can find the solutions and resolutions that you need in order to make the changes you want to make. So I'm not trying to get them to do anything. I'm more putting my focus on how can I make it as easy as possible for this person to have because here's the thing, Lee, we're all familiar with the idea in the physical body of having an immune system. Like most of the cuts and bruises and scratches that you've had in your life, you got over without doing anything about it, like without even noticing you got scratched or cut or bruised, okay? Yeah. That's because you have an immune system, and its job is to take care of your physical body. Now, there are things you can do to bolster your immune system, like drinking whatever that red shit was. You can do things to support and bolster your immune system, but it's your immune system that does the job of healing your physical body. It's not the food you eat or the medicine you take or anything like that. It's your immune system that does the job. And we're totally comfortable with and reliant on the idea of having an immune system that basically has our back, that takes care of us. But what most of us haven't realized until now is that just like you have a physical immune system, you also have a psychological immune system. And bundled in with that psychological immune system is a tendency towards clarity and peace of mind, that we have the capacity for peace and clarity and insight and realization. So just like if someone gets a cut and it's infected, you clean, or you don't want it to get infected, you clean the wound and then just keep dirt and germs out of it, and it'll heal nicely. It was the same thing with the human mind. You keep you create a space for the mind to be at rest, and it's gonna clear. It's gonna find peace of mind. It's gonna rest, and that's where people get the solutions and insights and realizations they need.
I mean, one thing that you said there that I think is really important. When you said about working with people, you don't really have to do anything. Having worked with you,
hang on a second. That's not what I said. What I said is, I'm not getting them to do anything to clear their mind. That's it. I didn't say I don't do anything. No. I do a lot.
I was actually just going to say, having worked with you, one of the things that you do very well is do your part to enable connection. Because it has to come from, like, me and you are working together. It cannot just be you. We both need to open the doorway, so to speak, to allow this transference of energy or whatever it is. And I think, so one of the things you said then when working with people is connection. And we do get a lot of people on the forum who are drinking because their relationships are falling apart, or their relationships are falling apart because they're drinking. And I think if you're listening to this and that sings to you, one of the things that you can try to kind of work on is, how can I get more connected to this person rather than how can I make them my enemy? Just think connection, because I feel that even whenever I have like World War III with my wife, the only time the rifles are put on the floor is when we've connected somehow. One of us sees the other person suddenly in that conflict, and then the other person feels seen, and then there's a connection. So I just wanted to mention that. I don't know if you want to comment on that anymore.
Yeah, well, and it's interestingly, because I don't know about you, but for me, when I drank, that was the only time I felt connected. It was the only time I felt connected to other people. It was the only time I felt connected to myself. It was the only time I felt connected to life, because for me anyway, my drinking was a symptom of a thinking problem. Okay, so to me, and this may be, I don't know if this looks obvious to you, but this, I know some people, when they hear what I'm about to tell you, it's kind of shocking to them. It looks to me like drinking was actually my best attempt to solve a thinking problem. So drinking was my medicine. Drinking was medication for me. So it's like drinking looked to me like my solution. It didn't look to me like my problem. It looked to me like a solution. And what it was medicating against was a lack of connection to myself, like a lack of feeling at home and comfortable in my own skin, a lack of connection to other people. I felt, often uncomfortable and awkward around other people, and a lack of connection to life itself. And so when I drank, all of that improved very quickly. Within a few drinks, I'd be like, here goes, the party's starting. I'm relaxed. I'm in a good space. I'm starting to pop. My pool game is starting to improve. I'm more easy and comfortable in my conversation with others, and so that looked to me like a good thing. Like the only problem was it had massive fucking side effects, and including horrendous things happening in all kinds of aspects of my life and other people's lives too. So there are hideous side effects, but the benefit of that the benefit of being able to feel at home in life, to be able to feel in connection with myself and with others, and that seemed worth it. So I kind of it looks to me like a lot of alcoholics and addicts that I've spoken to and worked with over the years, this will sound shocking, but if you asked me about connection, I didn't know the meaning of the word. I don't know what that meant. I never felt that in my day-to-day life. I felt that when I drank. And it's interesting, actually. There's a guy called, I think his name is Johann Hari.
Yeah.
So he talks about connection a lot. Now, it looks to me like what every alcoholic is looking for is a sense of peace, a sense of connection, a sense of aliveness, a sense of excitement, a sense of... So that's what everyone's looking for, I think, a sense of being themselves and have an experience of life. And so the interesting thing is, if that's what people are looking for, why are they going to alcohol to try and find it? And how it looks to me is the reason they're taking the step in that direction is because of what I call contaminated thinking that's generated by a fundamental misunderstanding of how the mind works. And how this shows up is as a misunderstanding of who they really are and what they're up to in life and where their experience is coming from. And it's really uncomfortable for people. And I see this actually, a lot of people who have managed to stop drinking or stop using, and yet they're still feeling uncomfortable. So they're managing to kind of keep it at bay and not do the behavior, which is great, by the way. You know, like that's probably a good thing, given the shit some of us get up to. But because the underlying, like if you stop and think about it for a moment, if alcohol is a solution to a thinking problem, which is my assertion, if alcohol is a solution, then stopping drinking, if anything, and this was what would happen to me, stopping drinking would just make the problem worse. So I'd go out on a bender or whatever, and I'd wake up 3 mornings later, I'd be like, okay, enough is enough. I'm done. That's it. It's over. And I'd make up my mind. I said, this time I mean it. This time I mean it. I'm done. It's over and done with. And that would be great. For the first couple of days, I'd be like, oh, I feel terrific. This is great. Why didn't I think of this before? I should have stopped ages ago. I've got a new lease on life. This is terrific. This is swell. Well, after a week, I'm like, man, I'm kind of fucking crawling the walls here now. Like, it seemed great 4 days ago, but now I'm fucking bored. I tell you what, I'll just go out and see if I'll go out and have an orange juice. Yeah. I'll go out and have an orange juice with my buddies or whatever. So I'm out having, and I go up to the bar and I'm literally practicing in my head saying I'll have an orange juice, and then what comes out is like pint of lager or whatever. And I'm like, oh, that was. I'll tell you what, and then I'd have the drink, and I'd be like, why was I being so dramatic? I just won't drink so much this time. Well, it looks to me like the thinking problem that I'm talking about, which is really just a misunderstanding about how our experience works, is so... as human beings, we so want to feel at home in our own skin and in our own lives. We have such a deep need for connection, not just connection to other people, but connection to ourselves, to who we really are, and that sense of aliveness and ease and well-being that comes with that. It's so important to us that we'll do almost anything to get it. And so this is why you see people going to catastrophic and insane lengths to feed an addiction, to escape from feelings of stress and discomfort, and to find that sense of peace and well-being or aliveness and energy or whatever you want to call it. And so it seems to me that just stopping drinking, for me anyway, just threw me into a more uncomfortable place.
Yeah.
It's left me wanting to have a drink.
I always, when I gave up drinking alcohol, it's interesting. I never really thought of the connection between connection and drinking alcohol. Initially, when you said it made you feel connected, the first thing that came up in my mind was it made me feel disconnected. But then the more you talked, the more I know that the reason I drank alcohol was because I was just programmed to drink it from birth. I just lived in a little Welsh valley of 3,000 people, and that's what we did. You didn't even sit down in your bedroom and say, okay, am I going to drink or not? You just never had that conversation. It was just you was going to drink. So in a way, of course, you're connected because everyone around you is doing the same thing. So therefore, you're within that tribe. So I get that. And when I quit, it's really funny. I felt a deeper sense of connection with who I was and the world and real disconnection with everybody around me and my my physical environment. And I found quitting drinking easy. What I found really difficult was what come after that. How do I now deal with the destruction? So alcohol destroys your life, but for me as well, when I quit, there was also destruction, because my wife left me, my friends didn't want to know me, my family didn't recognize me. There was nobody in my sphere who was like, oh wow, Lee, wow, you're going out drinking, this is amazing, I'm going to do the same thing with you. I maybe had one or two people who said, wow, well done, Lee, I wish I had the balls to do what you were doing. But beyond that, Jamie, they didn't want me around them in the pub anymore. I just made them feel really uncomfortable. So I always tell people when I work with them, okay, you want to quit drinking? Right, well, okay, cool. Right, let's talk about your life. You know, and we don't focus on the drinking. We focus on what's going on for you. How are you feeling? What's kind of like, what are your main issues and your problems? So, and drinking then, or the dissipation of drinking, or the stopping of drinking, kind of goes with moving in a better direction and putting your focus on different things and understanding that this contaminated thinking is really driving your actions and your behaviors, and getting aware of that. And I think the awareness of that, when I read the book Results, I was already thinking down those lines, but Results was very different. It explained it in a better way for me. I can't even I can't describe why you explained it so well, but it really made me sit up and think, oh, at last a book that's decent. You know, it's speaking to me.
Yeah. And I think what that suggests to me, Lee, is that while you were reading it, you had insights and realizations. And that's the purpose of the book, is to create a space where you as the reader can have the insights and realizations that are going to make a go-forward difference to you in your life. And I think that's ultimately, that's what's going to make the difference between someone getting sober and someone not getting sober. It's going to make the difference between someone making that change and not making that change. If you have insights into where your experience comes from and how you actually work, then it's not going to make sense for you to do something that hurts you. It's just not going to make sense anymore. I guarantee anyone who's drinking in a destructive way, because there are plenty of people out there who drink and it enhances their life. You know, they have a drink now and again and it doesn't cause them any harm. I don't care about what they're up to. But for anyone who's drinking in a way that is harming them, harming their well-being, harming their relationships, harming their life, anyone who's drinking in a way that is causing them damage, I guarantee you that it makes sense to them. Even if it doesn't seem like it does, even if it's kind of like, oh, but you've got everything to live for, or look, you've got this wonderful family, or look, you've got this great job, why are you doing this? Why are you fucking it up like this? Yeah. I guarantee on some level, the reason they're doing it is because it makes sense. Even if it's not evident why it makes sense, it makes sense. And the only thing that is going to change that is that you see the world differently. You see the thing is, we're built to live. We're designed to thrive. We're built to thrive and survive and live. So if we're doing something that's killing us, that's damaging us, that's anti what we're built for. Yeah. So the only way we can do that is if it makes sense. And if it makes sense to us to do it, then that means that our sense of it is out of touch with life. And so our primary job has to be to get more closely in touch with life, because as soon as you do, it's all going to become easier. It's going to make sense. to not drink. Lee, people sometimes, like I told you earlier, I've just realized that it's 20 years since I stopped drinking. So I literally haven't had a drink in 2 decades.
Yeah.
And sometimes if I tell people, I haven't had a drink in ages or whatever, they're like, "Oh, well done, good for you." But it doesn't feel like that, because it doesn't feel like I did it, kind of, in a way. Like, I know I did stuff and took steps and made effort and that sort of thing, but it kind of feels like it got handled for me as I started to see life more realistically.
Reality, getting out of la la land, as you like to say.
Getting out of la la land.
I
was living in la la land, and I didn't even realize it.
I just had an insight while you were talking about insights, which I'd like to share and poke around with.
Go for it.
Is one of the biggest challenges I have in my life currently, and have had in the last 8 years, is understanding that I have the ability to quit any addiction that has come my way. And there is a lot of them that have come my way, with the exception of really hardcore drugs. I've quit I've somehow managed to develop an addiction or a bad habit in all of them, and I've quit them all. So I know that I can do that. I also believe that every human being can do that as well, mine. That's, that goes without saying. But I know I can do it. And my biggest challenge has always been, how can I help other people do that? Being inspirational comes kind of natural to me. But when someone says to me, that's not enough, I want your 10 steps or your 12 steps or your 5 steps or your 1 step, I find it difficult to break down the methodology. And one of the things that I really had a difficulty with, and I wrote about it, and I called this article The Vow, is I said to people, there's just a moment. You talked earlier on about, you knew that alcohol was not good for you, so you quit, and you say, right, that's fucking it. And then 3 days later, you go to the bar, and your brain's saying, I want an orange juice, and you go to the bar and you say, right, I'll have a fucking vodka, or I'll have a pint of lager, right? And then you're back in an oscillation, right? But then at some point, something changes. And I call this the vow. And thinking now I've got this wrong, I thought to myself that at some point I reached a breaking point and just said, right, that's enough. And I knew that it was different than before. I just knew it from my gut. And I took this out of Robert Fritz's book, The Path of Least Resistance, where he talks about secondary choices, primary choices, and fundamental choice. And I realized I made a fundamental choice, and I called it the vow. So then when I was talking to people, I would say, you've got to have this vow. Like, at some point, you've got to have this fundamental, you've got to make this fundamental choice. What you've just made me realize is I've had that backward. I had an insight. And I can't teach people to have an insight. I can share my experiences. I can be there and hold space. I can provide tools like a podcast, forum, videos, but that insight will come from within. They will create their own insight. It will just happen. And then from that point onwards, boom, it's like the fucking handbrake's off.
You got it. And Lee, when I saw what you've just seen, what I realized was, then my job has to be to make it as easy as possible for them to have an insight, to stack the deck in the favor of that. So for the last, God, how long's it been? 8 years, 8.5 years, that's what I've spent all my time and energy and effort on, is developing my understanding of that one thing. Like, how it looks to me is there's one thing that's going to make a difference to people. It's going to be insight. It's going to be realization. They're just two words for the same thing, which to me, a realization is literally your perception being brought more closely into alignment with reality, with the truth of how life already works. So for instance, with the with the exception of those poor little babies who are born with a craving for crack or heroin because their mothers were addicted during labor, during pregnancy, babies aren't born addicted. Babies are born whole and complete in terms of they're not lacking some essential way of being. And then we get taught over the years to believe that there's something missing, okay? Yeah. And then we look outside for that, whether that's outside in other people's approval, outside of ourselves in terms of success or money or relationships or achievement or whatever. And then when we find that looking outside of ourselves can't kind of fill that hole, it feels uncomfortable. And then we look outside for a solution. We look outside to alcohol or drugs or porn or food, whatever it might be. And the realization is we've been looking in the wrong place. Now, insight and realization will bring you back to reality. It'll bring you closer to reality. And so that's everything I do today is pointing people in the direction of the truth of where all those good feelings come from. So the feelings of comfort or peace and well-being that people get from drinking or drugs, that's actually coming from within them. The drinking and the drugs is just taking away temporarily the stuff that's getting in the way. So it's an inside-out job.
I talk about that a lot with people that I work with, it took me a long time to see this, that here's a good example. They said there's a guy on the forum who's just landed on the forum. He's been there a couple of weeks now, and he done really well. I haven't been drinking for 2 weeks or whatever, but he was, and still is, kind of bumping along on willpower, which always kind of worries me a little bit. And he was worried about going to a party on this Saturday night because everybody was drinking and he didn't want to tell them that he didn't want to drink. And he went out to this party, and I'm at home with my fingers crossed. All I can think about is this guy, Jamie. I'm just thinking, I hope he manages to find, the whatever he needs to get through this moment. And the next day he checks in on the forum, and I was really happy with what he wrote. He wrote, I went to this place, and for the first couple of hours, I really enjoyed myself, right? I really enjoyed myself. And I didn't feel that uncomfortable about not drinking. I just told people I was driving, a few people there. And then I decided after a while that I felt comfortable enough to open up a little bit and just tell a few of my friends that I'm going to try and quit. And their feedback was, good on you type of thing. But then he said the whole place just kind of descended into anarchy. And I just said my goodbyes and left. But there was a part of me that was thinking, I'm missing out on something. And that enabled me to have a conversation with him that says, that's exactly what it is. Me and you are now having a conversation, and we're having a great conversation, a deep and meaningful conversation. And if we put a bottle of wine in our hands, and then we have a glass each, for a moment, we start to believe that the wine is now making us have a better conversation. But over time, that conversation is going to very seriously deteriorate because our ability to connect is going to be closed off more because we're losing it more because our senses are deadening. And for me, I don't know about you, Jamie, I start blacking out. So how can I have a coherent, wonderful, connected conversation if I'm blacking out? And for me, in that moment, the alcohol becomes a huge red herring. It's like...
Yeah, it's a tricky one for me because I don't know about you, Lee. I used to fucking love drinking. So trying to sell me on why a night of drinking isn't a good night out, that would have been a really tough sale. Even if you're like, yeah, but you'll be doing all sorts of crazy shit or not connecting with people. I was like, that's part of the fun of it. So everyone's different, but no one ever managed to sell me on going out drinking wasn't a fun night out and wasn't a good use of my time. It was not too difficult to sell me on going out drinking fucks your life up and ruins other people's lives and is dreadful. But I think there's something even simpler at play, which is we're not born with drinking problems. We're born with all kinds of amazing capacities, and how it looks to me is that for whatever reason, those of us who get caught up in excessive drinking and the problems that can come with that, we kind of didn't grow up in some key areas. So there's an emotional maturing to do. And part of how you go through that process is by just coming face to face with what's been getting in your way. And what gets in our way, it's the same for everyone. We get confused about who we really are and about where our experience is coming from. And so we look to alcohol or drugs or whatever to try and find the solution to that, and it ain't there. It ain't there. Go ahead.
That's kind of what I was talking about. So every time I went out and drunk, there's no way you could tell me that I didn't enjoy myself. I always had a great time, and generally the more I drank and the more havoc I wreaked, the greater the night was, as I told that story.
Yeah,
but
I get it.
But it's, to me, it's not the booze. It was just who I was with, the environment that I was with, and the booze to me was just. And when I quit, I could look back and I could realize the booze had nothing to do with it. If anything, the booze was actually spoiling me from having an even better time. I understand the hard sell.
My situation was very different. I fucking loved drinking. I loved it. I loved drinking. I loved the way it made me feel. And when I first got into recovery, if someone had said, look, there's two options. You can either stop drinking or we can show you how to keep drinking in a way that won't get you in so much shit, I would have taken the second option in a heartbeat. Now, I'm really glad that that option wasn't available, because the decision to stop drinking and to go on the journey of recovery and transformation that I've been on has led literally to a life beyond anything I could have imagined. My life is so amazing now, and it's unlike anything that I could have conceived of when I was drinking. So I'm really glad that second option wasn't available, but I fucking loved drinking. I was really into it. It was my favorite. It was my favorite thing. So I get what you're saying, but that wasn't my experience. And the reason I'm kind of making a point of that is I've spoken to countless alkies, and lots of them fucking loved drinking as well. So it's if someone had been trying to sell me on drinking's not fun and you don't really enjoy it, I wouldn't have signed up for that. That would have been a tough sale.
I think this is one we're going to have to agree to disagree on, because I
about my experience, not about your experience. It's not a matter of agreement. I get that your experience was, once you saw the truth of it, you realized that actually the alcohol was detracting from your experience. That wasn't my experience. Before I started drinking, I was neurotic and anxious, and when I started drinking, that made life better. Life got better when I started drinking. My quality of my life improved when I found alcohol. It was such a positive. I was like, where have you been all my life? Now, within a relatively short period of time, it was destroying my life, but it sure seemed like a benefit early on. And even as it continued to wreak havoc in my life, it still looked like a benefit. That's why I kept fucking drinking, even though it was costing me dearly. It still looked like a good deal.
But it's like a poker game, right? So anyone can win in the short term. The greatest players in the world win over the long term. So you were suffering from anxiety, neurosis, whatever. So you think that in that moment, I'm going to drink and it really makes me better, right? Take you back 20 years. Now you are successful beyond imagine. The long
Oh,
term,
absolutely.
right? The long term. So I try to help people try to look at the long term here. This short term value is no good if it leads to long term pain. Like, to me, value is long term, not in the moment.
Well, I understand
otherwise,
that.
otherwise, I'd still be drinking. I'd still be
Yeah,
drinking because it's
no,
so, you know.
I totally get it, and I think that if a person's going to go basically to being willing to put up with it, to use a phrase you used earlier, to get more comfortable with feeling uncomfortable. If someone's going to go down that road, then part of what that's going to involve is being honest with themselves. And so if a person's able to see that their life is that actually any experience can only be improved by having that experience with alcohol, if that's true for them, then great. If they're able to see that, great. If you'd have told me that, I would have thought you were full of shit, because that just wasn't my experience. My experience was that there was virtually no experience, nothing in life that couldn't be improved with a couple of drinks. And that looked absolutely real to me. And the reason I'm kind of being hardline on this is I want anyone who's watching this or listening to this to know that even if it looks like that, even if it genuinely looks like there's nothing in life which can't be made better with a couple of drinks, that it is possible to see the world differently from that. And you have that capacity within you, and you, even if it doesn't seem like that's possible, it's still possible for you. Because I swear, if you'd have seen me 20 years ago, you'd have been like, holy shit, that guy's a fucking drinking machine. He clearly loves drinking more than life itself. And not only do I not drink anymore, but it takes me no effort not to drink. Like, it takes no effort at all. I have put not 1 ounce of effort into not drinking for many years. There's no effort at all. And that is not that is something that's a gift of realization, a gift of getting a deeper understanding of who you really are and how it works. And the reason I'm being kind of hardline about this is because I know that if you're listening to this and you think, you know what, that's not me because I can't see anything that wouldn't be improved by a couple of drinks. It's like you can have a beautiful life that you genuinely and deeply enjoy, even if that doesn't seem possible to you yet.
Yeah, and I said earlier on that I realized that insight has to come from within, and both of us are here effectively saying that the catalyst to change in our life that allowed us to leave alcohol behind and to move forward into a life free of it was an insight. Now, if that has to come from within, and people are listening to this podcast or they come to my forum, they obviously haven't had it yet. So, and it has to come from within. So what advice would you give, Jamie, for someone who's listening to this right now, who's actually shouting at us right now saying, well, I haven't had a fucking insight. What it is, how can they better stack the deck in their favor? What can they do to improve the chances that something will happen?
Well, you know what I'll say, Lee, first of all, is the fact that a person is even listening to this or in your group or taking a step in that direction, I'd say is a sign that they've already had an insight of sorts, even if it doesn't seem like a big deal, even if it's just, comes in the shape of, holy shit, I got to do something about this. That is a step in the right direction. And so I think, what I'd say to anyone is keep looking in this direction and stay in the conversation, because you have the capacity for insight and realization within you. It's there in every single person. And I've worked with countless different people from countless different backgrounds. It's there in everyone. I promise you that. And even if you're going, no, man, that's bullshit, it's not in me. Yeah, you too. It's there in you. And I don't. What I can tell you is it's easier to find if you're someone who struggles with alcohol. It's going to be easier to get an insight when you don't have a drink in your hand. And I guess what I would say is, to anything you can do to, as you said, stack the deck in your favor, whether that's having conversations with other people that are looking in the direction you're looking, whether that's, I've got some resources I'll happily share. I'll share a link to them. Anything that's going to point you in the direction of kind of the ground zero of insight and realization, your own capacity for that. So that's what my books are all about. That's what my work's all about. I know it's something you're starting to pick up on, Lee. So that's
it's really challenging me. It's really making me question my thinking. It's even making me question my own thoughts behind my methodology behind why I quit drinking, and that scares me as well, in itself. But it's a nice scared. I feel like I said to Liza, my wife, yesterday, I had a podcast with Gary John Bishop, who wrote the book Unfuck Your Life, and I said to her, every time,
good title.
Yeah, every time I have these podcasts, I feel myself growing exponentially. I'm learning all the time, and that to me is part of what you just said beautifully. Staying in the conversation. Okay. Now, what does that look like to me? Staying in the conversation is listening to the right podcast. Listening to people who motivate you and inspire you, people who are where you are, but now they're somewhere else, like Jamie, or myself. Reading the right books, watching the right TED Talks. That is the conversation. The other thing I wanted to touch upon, me and Gary were saying this yesterday. Gary said, you can't have two thoughts at the same time, right? So if you're feeling a really shitty thought, you can't feel a positive thought at the same time. That's what Gary was saying yesterday. And I've just been thinking, you can't really have two effective conversations at the same time, right? So the other thing that just come up for me, I'm going to ask you the question actually is, when you're drinking, your conversation and your conversations are generally with other drinkers. And I don't know about you, Jamie, but I was a fucking zombie when I was a drinker. Like if someone would have given me your book when I was drinking, I would have wiped my ass with it probably. I would have read it, and it would have been like reading fucking Swahili. I'd be like, what is this guy on about? Because I was in different conversations. And how was it for you, Jamie, when you had your realization and you started to shift? Two things. How important was who you hung around with and your community shift and environment?
Well, okay, so it's interesting, actually. A couple of things happened all at once. So I got married in like 1996, and within a month of getting married, my wife's bags were packed because she was like, I'm out of here, you crazy drunk man. And I immediately leapt into a crisis mode and said, don't worry, baby, I'm stopping drinking. It's all gonna be fine. So she stayed, and I went to AA, and then after a few weeks, I was like, they're obsessed with drinking. That's very unhealthy. I'm gonna go my own way. So I just kind of white knuckled it for 9 months. So I was pretty functional. I had a job and everything like that. But in that 9 months, we moved to London, and I got a new job working as a consultant and da 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 da. And by the end of 9 months, without a drink, so I'd gone 9 months with no drinking, and I was ready to kill myself. I was suicidal. And I thought, well, it can't be anything to do with the alcohol because I haven't had a drink in 9 months. And I had no appreciation of what alcohol had been doing for me. I was off my meds, basically. I had been self-medicating with alcohol since I was 12 years old. And so I guess, how old was I in 98? 32 or 33. So I'd been self-medicating for 20 years. With alcohol. And Jamie, without alcohol and with my old thinking, was at a suicidal level of pain and anxiety and despair and desperation. And so I went to a shrink, and he said, well, in addition to seeing me several times a week, you need to go to AA. So I did that. I went back to AA, and what I found was that it was incredibly helpful to be around other people who were walking the same path as me in terms of trying to make some changes. It made a real difference to me to be around people who were being honest and real about what they were facing and what they were up against. And it made a real difference to me to be around people who clearly were doing better than I was, and who clearly, having listened to them, had been total fuckheads. It was really useful to hear someone and go, oh yeah, that guy was a total pissed up fuckwad, and now he seems to be doing okay. Like that.
It's that word hope again.
Yeah, that gave me hope. It's like, wow, I mean, like, there's a lot of these. And like, it was clear listening to these people that I was in the right crowd. Like they were drinking machines too. They loved booze, and they had all the stories of, you know, wet beds and waking up next to strangers and crashed cars and fucked up relationships and you know, the X, Y, and Z of it. They had it all. And so that did something for me to see that it was possible to get from where I was to somewhere better. And even if it didn't seem entirely real to me, in the sense of I still had that thing of this can't possibly work for me, but somehow seeing all of that and being around that created, you know, I don't even know if it was that created the space. I think that just being the interesting thing about being in a recovery meeting, being in an AA meeting or whatever, I know it's not everyone's cup of tea, but there was something about that just felt very safe. It felt very safe and very real. And so I'd say, Lee, that kind of to loop back to where we began, that's where I started to get a non-drunk experience of the feeling of connection to other people, the feeling of connection to life, and the feeling of connection to myself, to who I really am. I would go and I would sit in those church basements, and I would start to feel some peace of mind. And so that, you know, I would say that I'm not going to prescribe anything. What I'm going to say is any environment where you can feel a connection to yourself and to others and to life. And what I can also tell you is that as you get a deeper understanding of how your mind works and of who you really are, then any environment becomes a place where you can feel connected to yourself and to life. Like I'm sitting here in my living room next to boxes that I'm packing up for a move and that sort of thing, speaking on Skype, and I feel totally connected to you and to life and to myself. So what you begin to discover is that that's actually natural for human beings. It's the most natural thing in the world, feeling happy and peaceful and comfortable with yourself and with life is so simple that a baby can do it.
Well,
Okay?
that's
So it's not some special ninja skill you have to learn. The thing that you can learn is to see through the bullshit that tells you need something extra in order to experience that. That you to see through the lie that you don't have it within you. You already have it. It's right. You carry it with you every day of your life, and you carry it with you every step of every journey. You've got it with you right now. It's right there within you. And I understand for someone who's listening and goes, "What the fuck are you talking about?"
No.
It's so close. Like,
Yep.
it's so close to you. Like, if you're looking any distance away, that's not where it is. It's right there with you. It's inside you. You've got it. You've got it. And that's what I would say to anyone, Lee. I promise you, you have this within you. You have it. You have it.
You're lucky.
You just are willing to look in that direction. You're gonna find what you're looking for.
You're lucky, Jay, because you're the fourth podcast guest in a row who has basically said exactly the same thing, maybe in a slightly different way or using different words. So Gary yesterday was talking about we're all wired to win. We just forget that we are because of the contaminated thinking and this new worldview that we adopt that just layers and layers, and we forget where we are. And Zara and Dr. Gail Brenner before all saying the same thing. I think one thing you said there that I want people to rewind and listen to again, because I thought it was really great, was 9 months of no alcohol and you're feeling suicidal, but you realize that you haven't had any alcohol, so it can't be the alcohol. I think that is like super powerful. Like I really do think that is a really good, important thing you said then, and I want people to kind of like have a think about that.
Well, and the thing about that is, like, it looks to me like the alcohol was a solution to that issue. You know, that's why I kept drinking. That's why I kept going back to it. I'd never left it 9 months before, but that's why I kept going back to it.
I was going to ask you a couple of questions that came up on the Facebook group, if that's okay.
Go for it.
Probably going to butcher this name, actually. Jachim Jerry?
Yakim Yeri. I know Yakim.
Yakim Yeri. Do you have to stay off alcohol for the rest of your life, or can you become a casual drinker after being addicted to it? If you have a few words on that, and I'll say something after it, I guess.
Well, I don't have a view for anyone else. I know for me personally, it doesn't make any sense at all to drink alcohol. Like, I would have to be crazy to pick up a drink. If I look at the difference between my life today and how it used to be, I'd have to be insane to pick up a drink. And I'd say the same thing with regard to crack cocaine. Like, if you've been a crackhead and you get clean, does it make sense to be a social crack user? You know, it depends on how you relate to the chemical. My relationship to alcohol was like a crackhead relates to crack. It just wouldn't. I can't imagine anyone recommending a crackhead to take crack socially. And that's how I relate to alcohol. But that's just for me. People need to make their own decision. You know, maybe a little bit of recreational crystal meth use.
You wouldn't.
Looks pretty dubious
Jamie,
to me.
You wouldn't believe it, but I actually know someone who recreationally uses crack. He's a professional poker player, and he wrote about it, and I was absolutely dumbfounded that he in his I don't know, he said in his world that he managed to do it. It blows my mind. But my view on it is I don't see any value in drinking alcohol. So once I had my insight, and that was my insight, that there is no value in drinking it. That to me, the value was an illusion, and I was actually getting my value from other places, but I just happened to have this beer in my hand, which I thought was creating it. Because that worked for me, there's no way that I would ever want to drink moderately, because there's no point. You know, I have this view that it's a poison. Why would I want to put it in my body? There's no value. Then I'm never going to want to moderately drink. But I know that Stanton Peele, who was...
I loved getting fucked up so much that moderate drinking just seemed like really tedious. I never had any desire to be a moderate drinker.
Yeah, you think it's boring. I think it's pointless. But Stanton Peele, who's, you know, he's helped thousands of people quit drinking. He's a great believer that as you get older, this I want to get fucked up mentality just kind of gradually disappears. And I remember reading an article once from an old Hollywood actress who was in her 80s, and she just started drinking again, and she was having like a glass of port after being 50 years in AA or whatever. And the likelihood of her getting absolutely fucked up and her life getting ruined to bits is like kind of remote. And I see my old man now, my dad's in his 60s, and I was speaking to him the other day. He's a guy who's drunk like heavily all his life, Jamie, you know. And I said to him, how are you doing the other day? He said, I'm not even drinking anymore. He said, I don't know, it's not feeling right. You know?
I don't know, Lee. I know lots of people who have drunk themselves to death at every age of life. So to me, I think everyone's got to make up their own mind for it. I know plenty of people who have stopped drinking for a long time, and then when they were older, picked up a drink and have been dead within months. So it looks like serious fucking business to me, and I'm not interested in messing around with it. But maybe me and Stanton can meet up for a nice smoke of recreational crack sometime.
Stanton was quite funny actually. He was a second guest on my show, Jamie, and I reached out to him and said, would you be my mentor? And Stanton's like, yeah, I'll be your mentor. And I was so pleased and so happy. But I always like on The Needy Helper to allow all views to come on. You know, so like I'm not an AA kind of guy, you know, that's not my way of being, but I do not have AA guests. I have plenty of AA guests on here, and you know, if it works for them, it works. So then because I started doing that, Stanton said to me, don't ever fucking write to me ever again. I was just like, you fucking kidding me? I couldn't believe it. So you might be sharing some crack with Stanton in the future, but I don't think I will be. I think I'm off his crack Christmas list. But
see if he'll smoke a peace pipe with you.
Yeah. Final question from Mike Williams. How helpful do you...
I shouldn't joke. Don't take crack, kids. It's really fucking dangerous.
Yeah, I totally agree. And Mike Williams, how helpful do you feel the label of alcoholic is, both for those who are on their journey of change and those who are in denial?
Gee, I don't know, Mike. I mean, it's a complicated issue. It sure helped me out at a certain time in my recovery. It sure helped me out to have a sense of some kind of sense of identity and some sense of belonging. I mean, it looks like it can be helpful, but like all things, you know, it depends on the person. It was certainly helpful for me. It was certainly helpful for me to know what I was up against and to treat it with the respect it deserved, and to, you know, research about it, and it doesn't seem to have cost me anything in terms of it. The benefit that having an understanding of what I was up against and how it worked and how to get well from it, the benefits that has given me have been beyond substantial, and the price I've paid for it has been nothing in comparison to it. So to me, I'm just speaking for myself. It was incredibly valuable and helpful.
Yeah, I've seen the arguments and feel the benefits of both points of view. The one that you just said is something that I've heard a lot, and I see great value in that. And I've also seen people who the label prevents them from getting help. You know, it kind of like
Sure.
it prevents them from having a realization. It's almost like they don't even know that they've got a problem, even though they're getting fucked up every week. So I mean, to me, it's a word. I don't know really where I stand on it. I don't use it. I don't call myself an alcoholic. I know that much, but I know it really is a problem for some people. So I don't know if we've answered your question there, Mike, but you've got a viewpoint anyway. Jamie, I know you've got another meeting to get onto, so I just want to say thank you for joining. I know your time is very precious. Really appreciate it. I think people listening to this would have got to know you a lot better and to have learned quite a lot as well. What I do want to say is we talked a little bit, me and Jamie, about quitting drinking, you know, is one thing. But staying sober is another thing. And me and Jamie went through it through different, we went through different paths about how we did it. But for me, when I quit drinking, suddenly I had to think. It was almost like thoughts just fucking flooded me. I just started seeing things differently and it scared me. I realized that I hated my job and I wanted to quit, and I wanted to be Jamie Smart and Tony Robbins and Jack Canfield, because if they could do it, I could fucking do it, right? And all those things can really scare you. And what I will say is, it's really important, in the same way that Jamie looked around his meeting and thought, wow, I feel connected here. People get me. I can be my authentic self. I think it's really important that you continue to stay in the conversation. Seek out people like Jamie. Buy his books, Clarity, Results. Investigate his coaching.